When was the last time you used nevertheless in a sentence? Out loud, confidently, without second-guessing yourself halfway through? Yeah, that's what I thought. We have 7 words of contrast and concession markers that makes you want to punch the nearest wall. However, nevertheless, nonetheless, yet, admittedly, granted, and to be fair. Today I'm going to save your balls. Now, grab your coffee or tea, sit back down, put your snack on your lap, because we are fixing that. And by the end of this video, you will sound like you actually know what you are doing in an argument. Let's start with the one you already know. However. However is your standard contrast marker. Clean, neutral, works everywhere. Academic essay, however. Boardroom presentation, however. Passive-aggressive email to your coworker, also however. The presentation was well prepared. However, the timing was off. No drama, just contrast. Nothing fancy happening here. And that's exactly the problem, because however is so safe, so reliable, so universally acceptable. People just stop it there. They learn however and call it a day. Use it for everything, every contrast, every complication, every time they need to sound like they have a point. And honestly, it works, technically. But it's the grammatical equivalent of wearing the same outfit to every occasion. Sure, you're dressed, but you could do so much better. Because however has no weight, no emotional charge. It just sits there, contrasting politely, forever. So what do you use when the contrast actually matters? When something seriously stands in the way and you need your audience to feel that? This is where it starts getting interesting. Nevertheless and nonetheless look like however's more sophisticated cousin, and they are. But the difference isn't just formality, it states. Both of them are saying something significant stood in the way, and this happened anyway. The team had no funding, no resources, and no clear direction. Nevertheless, they delivered. That's not just but. That's despite all of that. The weight of everything before it makes the contrast hit harder. However would have made that sentence forgettable. Nevertheless makes it almost cinematic. Now, nevertheless versus nonetheless. I know, same word, different hat. Functionally interchangeable, yes. But nonetheless lives more comfortably in written English. Reports, academic papers, formal documents. Nevertheless, flows more naturally in speech. Writing a policy paper, nonetheless. Making a point in a meeting, nevertheless. Texting your friend, neither. Seriously, what are you doing? Okay, so we have covered the something stood in the way energy. But what about when the contrast doesn't just feel heavy? It feels like a plot twist, because that's a completely different animal. And it only takes one syllable. Yet, one syllable. And somehow it hits harder than both nevertheless and nonetheless combined when you use it right. Here's why. Nevertheless says, despite the odds. Yet says, I cannot believe this actually happened. There's disbelief baked into it, almost indignation. Like reality just decided to do whatever it wanted without consulting anyone. She had no formal training, yet she outperformed everyone in the room. Feel that raised eyebrow? That's yet doing its job. It's not just contrast. It's contrast with a side of, excuse me, what? And because it's so short, it creates a beat, a pause before the reveal. It works especially well as an opener. Yet somehow, nobody noticed. That yet is a warning shot. It's telling your audience, what I'm about to say defies logic. Brace yourself. Use yet when you want your contrast to feel cinematic, not just a counterpoint, a revelation. Now, up until this point, we have been talking about contrast, one thing going against another. But there's a whole other category that people consistently get wrong, and it's arguably more important if you ever need to win an argument. Concession markers. And the first one, it's a power move that most people don't realize they are making. Admittedly, looks like weakness. It's not weakness. When you use admittedly, you are voluntarily pointing out the flaw in your own argument before anyone else can. You are getting there first, naming it, and then walking past it like it's barely worth mentioning. Admittedly, the sample size was small. The findings are still significant. Read that again. You just acknowledge a methodological weakness and kept your argument intact because you controlled the narrative. You didn't wait for someone to throw it at you. You threw it yourself, casually, on your way to a bigger point. It tells your audience, I'm self-aware enough to see my own blind spots, which means everything else I'm saying, you can trust it. But what if you don't have time for self-reflection? What if you are mid-argument and someone just made a valid point and you need to acknowledge it without losing momentum? That's where this next one lives. Granted, has no patience for feelings. Same basic function as admittedly. You are conceding a point. But where admittedly pauses to reflect, granted acknowledges and moves immediately. It's almost aggressive in its efficiency. Granted, the timeline was aggressive. The results speak for themselves. That's it. That's the whole concession. One clause, then pivot. No dwelling, no explaining, no apologizing. Yes, okay, fine, you got me on that one. Irrelevant. Here's why I'm still right. It's debate team captain energy. It's negotiation room energy. The difference between admittedly and granted in one line. Admittedly is strategic vulnerability. Granted is strategic impatience. Both are power moves with different flavors. And now for the last one, which is technically not a concession at all, even though everyone treats it like one. And this distinction matters more than you think. Here's what most people miss about to be fair. It's not about your argument at all. Admittedly and granted are both about conceding something in your position. To be fair, it's about defending someone else's. It introduces balance. It says, before we finish judging this situation, let's make sure we are actually being reasonable about it. The project failed. To be fair, nobody gave them adequate resources. You are not weakening your own point. You are playing referee. You are the person in the room who goes, hang on, let's be fair here, before the verdict gets delivered. This is also why it sounds so conversational, because it shows up exactly when a judgment is being made and someone needs to complicate it. It's as much a social function as a grammatical one. Use it as a filler phrase like most people do, and your argument loses precision without you even noticing. Because suddenly, you are using referee language when you should be using advocate language, and those are not the same role. Okay, 7 markers. Let's learn this. However, neutral contrast, safe, reliable. The grammatical equivalent of a white button-down shirt. Nevertheless, and nonetheless, contrast against serious odds. Something stood in the way. It happened anyway. Weight and gravitas included. Yet, Contrast with disbelief. One syllable, cinematic impact. Admittedly, when you see a weak spot, you name it first. Power move. Granted, it's when you concede fast and pivot faster. Zero patience for losing momentum. And to be fair, you're not the defendant. You are the referee. Same category on paper, completely different personality in practice. And now you know which one to reach for. And more importantly, why. This is episode 1 of the Discourse Markers series. Episode 2, we are going into result and conclusion markers. Therefore, thus, hence, consequently, because apparently people have been using this interchangeably for years and nobody said anything. And honestly, it shows. Subscribe if you want that video. You know where the button is.